This Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we have the 6th ranked 8-1, 5-1 in SEC play Tennessee Volunteers taking the road to Athens, Georgia to play the 11th ranked 7-2, 5-2 in SEC play Georgia Bulldogs in Sanford Stadium. Again, this game will take place at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and it will be streamed on ABC and ESPN Plus. Georgia opened up as an 8.5-point favorite, and the line has trended up a bit, perhaps due to the fact that Nico Imaliava's status is uncertain. Georgia right now is favored by 10 points. The line's Georgia minus 10 at home, and the Bulldogs are given a 61.8% chance to win this game per ESPN's FPI. This is a program game for both of these teams. It is so impactful, not just for the immediate future, for both of these teams' college football playoff aspirations, especially for Georgia, because I don't think a 9-3 Georgia gets in. A 10-2 Tennessee likely still gets in, but still it's very impactful because you want that home playoff game. You want a shot to win the SEC, where Tennessee right now, in fact, leads the conference with a 5-1 conference record, tied first with Texas A&M there. This is so impactful. Again, not just for the immediate future, but for the near future, because Tennessee beating Alabama and Georgia in the same season would be monumental for Heupel rebuilding this program into what it was in some of the years, especially the earlier years, under head coach Philip Fulmer, where he won the SEC, won the national championship with T. Martin at quarterback. As for Georgia, if they win this game, they're not guaranteed to be in the playoffs, because I think Georgia Tech could give them some issues if healthy, but they'll likely beat Georgia Tech. They'll likely make the college football playoff. It's a bit of a rebound after a very disappointing loss to Ole Miss. And from there, well, you do what you can do. But 10-2 with the nation's toughest schedule would, while not a success, it wouldn't be a success, I don't believe, for the Georgia standard. I don't think it would necessarily be a failure either if they made the playoff and then went on a little bit of a playoff run, given all the injuries they've sustained, the fact that I think they've been disappointing in some position groups as well. But this is such a big game, and I cannot wait to give you my preview, my analysis, and also my prediction, because this game is not going to be as lopsided as it was last year, where Georgia won 38-10, and after Tennessee took a 7-0 lead, it was 38-3 the rest of the way. Before we get into this game, though, and I give you matchups, analysis, and also my score prediction, I just ask that you help out the channel by clicking that subscribe button to help us get to 30,000 subscribers. We will be doing a giveaway to celebrate 20,000 subscribers to many of you at the end of the regular season. So also, just pay attention to the channel. It'll be announced in several videos after the regular season concludes, after Conference Championship Week, and the details of the giveaway will be finalized then as well. But just pay attention to that. Subscribe to the channel so that we can be in your feed, so that you can join this awesome community. We are the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and I know for you SEC folks that does sound weird, but we're trying to expand our brand to more of a national audience. So thanks to you, thanks to Big Ten fans, thanks to college football fans, we are striving to be the best college football channel on YouTube. So subscribe to show us support, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release new content. Like the video to give us a boost in the algorithm. Comment your preview and prediction for this game down in the comments section below. Tell me if you're going to this game, if you're a Georgia or Tennessee fan. And also join our Discord server. We'd love to have more SEC fans in our Discord server, where we talk college football 24/7. The link to join that is in the description and down below in the pinned comment. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, you can donate via Super Chats on YouTube, or you can sign up as a paid member of my Patreon page via the link in the description down below in the pinned comment. Or if you want comfortable merchandise, you can purchase merchandise from my merchandise store. Again, the link to that, same with the Patreon page, is in the description. The link is, and also in the pinned comment. But let's check out both of these teams, shall we? We'd like to look at the broad view on college football with Sam, and then dive deep into the weeds, into the forest, look at the different ecosystems and the little details. These teams are very, very similar, and I don't think that's up for debate. Georgia earlier in the year I thought was going to be much better than Tennessee. Much, much better. But a lot has changed since the preseason. Tennessee is one of the best defenses in the country. The argument to have the best defense in the country. That is something I did not see coming in the preseason. Their offense is a little clunkier than I thought it was going to be, but especially on the ground, it is very successful. Georgia, their defense is about what I expected it to be in the preseason. Not the nation's best, but better than it was last season. And offensively, they are an absolute mess compared to what they were last year. Consequentially, these teams are pretty equal. Georgia has more talent. Georgia has the head coach with the better reputation. Head coach who I think everyone, including Tennessee fans, would say is better. Georgia's the more talented roster. And Georgia has home field advantage here. But Georgia's also coming off of a loss to Ole Miss where it kind of reminded me, and this analogy is far from perfect, it reminded me of the Eagles versus the 49ers. I don't like the NFL, but I do pay attention because it's football, and I like football, regardless if it's the NFL or college football. I just like college football way more than the NFL as a sport. But in that game, the 49ers couldn't do anything offensively because their quarterbacks were banged up. They suffered critical injuries. The Eagles were an elite team, same with the Niners when healthy, but the Niners weren't healthy, suffered critical injuries, and the Eagles were just that team that year. They barely lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl that season. That's what the Ole Miss-Georgia game reminded me of, where San Francisco was competitive for a bit against the Eagles because they had talent, they were good, they were well coached, but it didn't matter at the end because of the injuries they sustained. And also, the Eagles that year, I think, quite frankly, were better coached. They had the better roster assembled even when they were healthy, so the injuries just compounded what was the obvious. It felt that way with Georgia-Ole Miss. Georgia only had one complete drive. That was at the beginning of the second half, and it ended with a field goal. Ole Miss had several complete drives that ended in a field goal, and some others that resulted in touchdowns, even with Jackson Dart's leg being banged up and their offensive line not even being close to the nation's best. It was just Lane Kiffin outcoached Kirby Smart, and his roster was better than Kirby Smart's on that day. Tennessee, meanwhile, they've beaten Alabama. They have momentum. I think they're riding a bit of a hot hand, and they rested Nico Imaliava against Mississippi State. Tennessee's viewed as 20 points better than the average college football team in FPI, 22.8 points better than the average college football team in S&P Plus, and 15.4 points better than the average college football team in my potential power index. Georgia is viewed as 22.2 points better than the average college football team in FPI, 24.7 points better than the average college football team in S&P Plus, and 15.9 points better than the average college football team in my PPI, the potential power index. Georgia's home field advantage, especially in a night environment, is going to be menacing. So I'd say give them 4 to 5 points of home field advantage, not the usual 3. Even factoring that in, Georgia's favored by 10 points, and power ratings factoring in that home field advantage are telling you that Georgia will only win this game by 6 to 7 points per FPI. For S&P Plus, they will only win this game by, again, 6 to 7 points. By potential power, they'll only win this game by anywhere from 4 to 5 points, or more accurately 4 to 6, because 4.5, 5.5, you want to round up to 6. Anyway, the point being, this is going to be a competitive game. The power ratings say that, the analytics say that, the matchups even say that. We'll get into that in a few minutes here. And you look at the points per play margin, you look at the expected points added margin. Georgia is pretty high in expected points added margin because they are able to move down the field and they're able to create drives. And their defense is very good at forcing turnovers, giving their offense good field position, and shutting down opposing offenses. They have 0.236 EPA margin. Tennessee is 0.241 EPA margin. That's where the similarities end, though. When it comes to scoring points on a play-per-play basis, on a drive-per-drive basis, Tennessee's more successful even with the issues they've had on offense themselves. They have 0.245 points per play margin, which means on a play-by-play basis, they score 0.245 more points than their opponent does on a per-play basis. Georgia only has a 0.106 points per play margin, which, again, they faced a very tough strength of schedule. No one is denying that, but they were sloppy against Florida. They nearly got blown out by Alabama. They did get dominated by Ole Miss. They didn't look all that pretty against Mississippi State, and they didn't look pretty against Texas. They just looked prettier than Texas. That game against Texas, with how those two teams played, were two pigs with lipsticks. Georgia just on that day was the more aggressive and bigger pig, so therefore they won. But that was a very ugly game. I never want to watch anything like that again. That, as a fan of the Big Ten, that was a Big Ten West style game between two SEC teams. That's what Texas Georgia was. It was gross. And in the Big Ten West, it's always entertaining, or formerly the Big Ten West, because those teams don't have talent. They're memeable. For Georgia and Texas to play that way is kind of disappointing, given all the offensive talent they have, all the 5 stars, 4 stars, and all the athletes in those receiver rooms, running back rooms, quarterback rooms, etc. But Tennessee is the more dominant team when you don't factor in strength of schedule. Both of these offenses do have potential, but Tennessee's, I think, has been more efficient. And Tennessee, I think, still has the opportunity to trend up. Georgia's clearly trending down. And Tennessee, the Volunteers, have played a respectable strength of schedule. It's 35th. Georgia's is first. Tennessee's 10th in game control. Georgia is 8th, and they're declining in game control. Game control is how would the average top 25 team do given your schedule? And then that's ranked. So 9 teams would do better with Tennessee's schedule than Tennessee would. Only 7 would do better with Georgia's schedule than Georgia would, including Ole Miss, who's number 1 in game control, actually. So just looking at these two teams, they're very similar. Tennessee is statistically better in a lot of areas due to their easier strength of schedule, but I think also due to the fact that they could be the better football team. In fact, they're trending up right now, as power ratings would say. Georgia's trending down a bit. But we're going to learn a lot here because Tennessee is going on the road to a Georgia team who, while I think it's clear they're worse than Alabama, at least right now, it's still on the road. Tennessee beat Alabama in 2022. They beat them this season. They have not beaten Georgia since 2016 when they won off of a Hail Mary. They haven't. It was also the last time they won in Sanford Stadium. So I'm very interested to see this game, to watch it at night, and I think, that the key matchup here is Tennessee's defense against a Georgia passing offense that has mightily struggled, because I don't think Georgia's running the football. They have not had success running the football on anyone worth a lick on defense. And through the air, they've had some success, but they've had struggles there. And I do think that with the clunkiness of Tennessee's offense, some of the issues they had with Nico connecting with his receivers and the chemistry there, and also the offensive line, I do think that Georgia will have opportunities on defense to maybe create turnovers or to limit Tennessee's scoring offense. I do not think this will be a shootout. I don't. I thought it was going to be that way in 2022. Well, boy, was I wrong when Georgia only won by 14 points, but it felt like they won by 40 and were clearly the much better team. I think that the total in this game might be similar to that game. Obviously, I don't think, if you can already tell, that Georgia will be as dominant as they were in 2022 over Tennessee. 2022, Georgia would handle both of these teams, in my opinion. They would handle both of them. But here, if Carson Beck can step up, if he can play like he did in 2023, if his receivers can run better routes, if his offensive line can give him more time, and the defense plays like how it has, with home field advantage, then Georgia should win. If you're a Bulldog fan, you should expect a victory if those things are checked. If they are checked and you lose, then that's a gut punch, because you gave your best effort and Tennessee still won. If you're a Tennessee fan, what you want to do is you want to pressure Beck to death, force him to throw picks, because he will throw picks, whether pressured or not. But, pressured will give you more opportunities for those picks. You want to frustrate Georgia, get them off schedule, and force their defense to carry them to victory. Because this defense, it's better up front than the 23 unit was. It's still not 2021 or 2022 Georgia defense. It's still not a Dan Lanning defense. It's not the defense that Georgia had when Will Muschamp was an on-the-field coach. It's not. It's absolutely not. I mean, they're better than they were last year, yeah. But Ohio State's defense is better, and I might go as far to say, for example, that Dan Lanning's defense in Oregon is better than this defense. And Penn State's, I think, is better. I think Texas has the better defense. But this is a unit for Georgia defensively that's very good. Point being, it will be hard for them to carry the game against a Tennessee offense that has had some inconsistencies, but is still really good. I mean, they're top 25 in points per game. They've scored 33.6 points per game. When you look at points per play, they're scoring 0.449, which is 36th. Georgia's only scoring 0.41, which is 53rd. Georgia's not even hitting 30 points per game right now. They're averaging 28.4. And that includes Alabama, where they crossed 30. They couldn't cross 10 against Ole Miss, though. They struggled against Florida. And it's not been a good year for Georgia's offense. It hasn't. So if they can break through, then they'll find some success. If not, well, that's where Tennessee's opportunities really begin to become a dominant factor here. And you can flip it on its head and say that if Tennessee's defense can't step up in this big game, like how they stepped up against Alabama, gave Jalen Milroe his worst his worst performance in his career, probably, certainly worst performance of this 2024 season. If they can't step up, or if the offense just completely flails, then that's where Georgia can threaten to take over. Tennessee's defense, you look at this unit, and in stopping the run, they are 5th in opponent yards per carry, only allowing 2.9. And teams love to run on Tennessee. Tennessee is 75th in opponent rushing attempts per game, and yet they're top 15 in opponent rushing yards per game and top 5 in opponent yards per carry. You look at their total defense, they're 2nd in opponent yards per play, only allowing 4.1. They force 2.4 opponent punts per offensive score and 0.09 opponent punts per play, inside the top 5 in both of those categories. They only allow opponents to score 0.204 points per play and 13.8 points per game. Again, top 10, 5th in points per game, 6th in points per play. Georgia is not top 15 in any of those categories. Georgia's defense, again, good, faced a tougher strength of schedule, but Tennessee has been very impressive on that side of the ball. And you look at Georgia, my apologies, we'll talk about Tennessee's passing offense too, but you look at Georgia's passing offense in this matchup. Georgia is only averaging 7.6 yards per pass attempt, 43rd. They're averaging 11.7 yards per completion, 72nd. They're completing 64.86% of their passes, which is 24th, but they are also throwing 1.5 interceptions per game, which is 126th, and not a path to victory in big games. So that's the matchup here. Is Tennessee's defense, which is able to stop the run. I mean, I would be genuinely shocked if Georgia rushes for more than 3 yards per carry in this game. That would that would blow me away if Georgia ran for 3 yards per carry in this game. How they are going to win is the fact that while Tennessee is top 15, top 10, top 5 in rushing defense, despite opponents running the ball on them all the time, Tennessee is not top 15 in pass defense in terms of yards per pass attempt, yards per completion, which I care more about than just straight up passing yards per game, because that can be, I think, more deceptive than some of those other statistics that we look at. And Tennessee, they're 20th in sack percentage with an 8.3, which is good, but their rushing defense and their defensive front is better than their defensive backfield. And Georgia is stronger in passing offense than they are in rushing offense. So that is what is going to decide this game right here. Let's check out both of these offenses and dive a bit deeper, shall we? I think that Tennessee has an edge at the skill position. I think they're better at quarterback, they're better at running back, they're better at wide receiver. Where this begins to get competitive is tight end and offensive line. Even with Brock Bowers leaving, I never thought that Georgia would be in the same conversation with Tennessee or really anyone outside of maybe Iowa and Michigan and maybe Texas in terms of tight end talent. But here we are. Georgia's entire offense at every position has been disappointing. Every position. And Kirby Smart would tell you that. Mike Bobo, who many have criticized, especially after the Ole Miss game, and rightfully so, I think would tell you that. Tennessee, quarterback is not a guarantee. In fact, I just read a tweet that said Nico Imaliava might be out for this game. If that's the case, then that is really going to hurt Tennessee's cause. But Imaliava has 1,879 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He has a 64.3 QBR, which is 55th, 149.4 passer rating. He's been sacked 16 times, but still has 215 rushing yards, a touchdown on the ground, and 3.4 yards per carry. Carson Beck somehow is higher in QBR, despite throwing for 3 times the amount of interceptions with only 6 more passing touchdowns. Beck has 2,488 passing yards, 7.8 yards per pass attempt, 17 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He has a 140.5 passer rating. He has 39 rushing yards and sacked 14 times. His offensive line is so much worse than it was last year. Part of that's due to the injuries. I think they also may be missing Cedric Van Pran in the middle, and he has no rushing touchdowns. I gave Tennessee the edge at quarterback despite the lower QBR because I think that Beck is kind of breaking a bit. You look at the game against Ole Miss, where he did not have an awful game. 108 passer rating, 55.9 QBR. Bad, yeah, but he wasn't the reason why they lost that game. Their defense could not get a stop unless Ole Miss was close to the 20. So they were going to allow a field goal every drive to the Rebels, if not more. And also, Nate Frazier kept trying to fumble the football away, and Georgia's receivers did not execute well. I mean, Ole Miss just right out of the gate was the better team. It wasn't evident on the first drive. The first drive, it looked like Georgia might come out and, okay, they're going to bully this team. But Ole Miss quickly took control, and we know how that whole story goes. But against Florida, he threw 3 picks. Against Texas, he threw 3 picks and at a 77.3 passer rating. Somehow, with a 62.6 QBR, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that QBR is based off of expected points added, and Beck was almost always in Texas territory due to Texas's own turnover issues. Against Mississippi State, he threw 2 picks. Against Alabama, he threw 3 picks. Auburn doesn't have a defense worth all that much. Against Kentucky, he didn't have that good of a game. Tennessee Tech, that doesn't count for much. And against Clemson, this is Clemson's worst defense since probably before Brent Venables was their defensive coordinator. This Clemson defense is very overrated. Very overrated. I picked Nico because I believe Nico's the more talented player. I think Nico is better with ball security. And I think Nico has more upside. And in a big game like this, I do expect Georgia to bring some heat, to even turn it up a notch on offense despite some of their ineptitude. But I also expect the same thing from Tennessee, especially on offense where that's Josh Heupel's specialty. So that's why I'm going with Tennessee at quarterback, although QBR would say that I'm incorrect there. I do think that the Volunteers' rushing offense is going to be a whole lot to handle in this matchup because Dylan Sampson already has 1,000 rushing yards, 1,129 to be exact, 20 rushing touchdowns, 5.6 yards per carry. Deshaun Bishop has 372 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, averaging 6.9 yards per carry. Dante Thornton leads the team, transfer from Oregon, very good player. 505 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. Brew McCoy has 357 receiving yards. Squirrel White has 304 and a receiving touchdown. Chris Brazel II has 265 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Miles Kitzelman has 183 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. On the Georgia side of things, the Bulldogs here, their leading rusher is Trevor Etienne, who has 7 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 5 yards per carry with a whopping 477 rushing yards. It's not that good. Nate Frazier is 333 rushing yards, 4.6 yards per carry, 3 rushing touchdowns. Dylan Bell is 100 rushing yards on 7 carries for a touchdown, but Georgia overall is only averaging 4.2 yards per carry. And that's factoring in the FCS game, which TeamRankings.com, the website I data scrape to give you all those statistics, a ton of them in each matchup, they don't count FCS games. And once you take that FCS game out, Georgia only runs the ball for, just wait for it, guys, let me find it, 3.9 yards per carry 85th. And they only average 119 rushing yards per game, 104th. This is not a good rushing offense. They're going to have to rely on Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, Lawson Lucky, London Humphreys, Colby Young, Oscar Delp. They're going to have to rely on all those players to make this offense work. Arian Smith leads the team in receiving yards with 535. He has 3 receiving touchdowns. Dominic Lovett has 430 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. Dylan Bell has 393 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. And Lawson Lucky leads the tight end room with 213 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Georgia has allowed 15 sacks on the year, 14 to Carson Beck. Tennessee's allowed 18 sacks on the year, 16 to Nico Imaliava. You look at the sack percentage for both of these teams right here. Overall, Tennessee has a 7.08 percentage, which is 92nd. Georgia has a 4.52 sack percentage. Georgia's earlier in the year was good, but as I've mentioned, they've sustained some injuries. I think they're getting a little bit worn down with the tough schedule in part, but also the injuries that they've incurred, which can happen whether you play a tough schedule or not. And I think that they have some problems scheme-wise on offense. They're being figured out as the season goes on. I do think Tennessee overall has the better offense. They score more points per play. They're more balanced. I mean, they can run the football. Georgia can't run the football. And Tennessee, even in spite of that, is more effective in passing. They're more effective at passing the ball than Georgia is. Defensively, I think that Tennessee's defense right now, the way I see things, I don't know if I'd say they're the better unit. We'll get into coaches in a few minutes, and I think Georgia's the better coached team on defense and at the head coach position. I still think Smart is one of the best, if not the best, head coaches in the country. But Tennessee's front is nasty. They can get to the QB. They're very good at tackling. And watching Georgia's defense against Alabama, watching it against Ole Miss, in their 2 losses, in the biggest moments, the biggest moments outside of that Texas game, where I think Texas's offense had an off day, they were dealing with some injuries. I think that Georgia had a really good game plan on defense, and it was an ugly performance from both sides. In games where they faced offenses that didn't constantly shoot themselves in the foot, they did get torched. They did. And I have not seen that happen to Tennessee's defense outside of that weird game against Arkansas where they still only allowed 19 points. And I think a lot of that game was on Tennessee's offense a bit. Tennessee on the season has 22 sacks, 8 interceptions, 31 passes defended, 9 forced fumbles. Georgia's defense has 21 sacks, 23 passes defended, 6 interceptions, and 6 forced fumbles. You look at the sack rate for both of these defenses here. Tennessee has a 8.3 sack percentage, 20th. Georgia has a 6.45 sack percentage, 54th. Teams don't like to run the football on Georgia, and yet despite the fact that they like to run the ball in Tennessee more, Georgia allows a half more yard per carry. And Georgia through the air allows 0.7 more yards per pass attempt and 1.1 more yards per completion. And Tennessee's better in opponent completion percentage. Georgia is better in opponent incompletions per game, but that's because teams pass the football for nearly 4 extra attempts on the Bulldogs. Even when you factor in strength of schedule, you begin to wonder that if Georgia played an easier schedule, would they be the best team in the country? Probably not. If they played a Big 12 or ACC schedule, they may be undefeated, but they could also be like Miami, and they just suffer one loss, or they still play in some close games like they did against Kentucky, who's one of the SEC's worst teams, or they let a team like Mississippi State, who's bad, hang some points on them, or Florida, who would be a middle of the road or maybe above average ACC or Big 12 school. They compete in that conference. The point that I'm trying to make is Georgia's a really good team. They are. But you can only factor in strength of schedule so much. I mean, Michigan last year, Did not play a tough schedule really until late November, and they won it all. Georgia in 21 and 22 did not play a super tough schedule in the months of September and October. They did not. They won it all. Were pretty convincing. Even with weak strength of schedules, you can tell who the elite teams are. There aren't many, if potentially any this year, in my opinion. But I don't know. I have a lot of questions about Georgia. I think that Georgia on the interior of the defense is very good. Nazir Stackhouse has stepped up. Christian Miller, Jamal Jarrett, Warren Brinson. Defensive tackle for Georgia is very competitive with Tennessee, where Amari Thomas, Bryson Eason, Elijah Simmons, and Omar Norman Lott also make up an elite interior D-line. But James Pierce Jr., Dominic Bailey, Tyree West, and Joshua Josephs, they're better than Georgia's Michael Williams, Chaz Chambliss, Damon Wilson II, and Tyron Ingram Dawkins. At linebacker, when healthy, I would take Tennessee's Arian Carter, Jeremiah Talander, Caleb Perry, Jalen Smith. Is Keenan Peely out for the year, by the way? Is he? I think he's out for the season, but I'm unsure. So let me know in the comments section whether he is or isn't, because I could be wrong on that. It's hard to keep up with all the injury reports. I'd take that room over C.J. Allen, Smile Munden Jr., Jalen Walker, and Raylan Wilson. Competitive, but still take Tennessee there. They've stepped up in spite of the injuries. And Tennessee, their secondaries performed well, even with some of the questions there. Even having to rely on some transfers, some younger and new players, they've performed well. Tim Banks has coordinated wonderfully this season. So I take Tennessee at D-end, linebacker, corner. I think it's a push at defensive tackle and also safety. I think that Tennessee is actually better in the trenches than Georgia this season. I think that they're better on the D-line slightly. O-line's a bit of a push there, so I lean Tennessee, but I think it's closer to equal than not. And if you want to make an argument that Georgia's better, they've just played that much tougher as a strength of schedule because of how close it is, I'm willing to hear that argument. And I also think that Georgia, they have a good special teams unit, so they edge out Tennessee on the special teams side of things. Coaching-wise, outside of the offense, where I think that Tennessee's offensive staff, especially with Josh Heupel being an expert in that area, are better, I think Georgia has the better head coach. I think they have the better defensive staff. And I think they have good strength and conditioning. I don't think Georgia's problem is all that much due to strength and conditioning. I don't. I think a lot of it has to do in part with scheme and with roster building moves and some other things as well. And also the fact that Brock Bowers was a generational player on offense and Todd Monken was a generational offensive coordinator. And you went from a lot of generational talent on offense, more than Kirby Smart typically has, to Mike Bobo, who I think is more of an average OC than not. If anything, maybe worse than that. His prior time at Georgia was not a success before his second tenure. And also at tight end and receiver, they've taken steps back from last season. I don't think that a lot of this is coaching in terms of game-to-game, week-to-week scheming. Now, in terms of roster development, in terms of setting up your roster to win it all, that does fall, I think, on Georgia's coaches. But I still think Georgia has the better staff in this game, and that's what's scary about this matchup. Is Tennessee's roster right now, I think, is in a better position to compete for the SEC, to compete for the national championship than Georgia is. But staff is very important. Coaching is very important. That's why I thought that even with Ole Miss's improvements on the roster, that Georgia was going to go into Oxford and win a big game. But instead, Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin broke through. They won the big game. And I'm going to give Lane Kiffin credit there. And I think after that win, he's a top 15 head coach. At the same time, I question whether the win over Georgia is big in the sense that you beat a national championship caliber team, or if it's big more in a symbolic way. That he broke through that mental barrier, he showed he can coach around an elite staff, and yet at the same time, maybe Kirby Smart, while being an elite coach and having a staff that's elite, this team as a collective is not elite. It may just be great. It may just be, dare I say it, good. I do think that Tennessee wins this game here. Now, my potential power index, my power ratings, say that neutral field Georgia's a little bit better, and then you factor in home field advantage, and it says that Georgia's about anywhere like dead on or just about dead on in between a touchdown and a field goal, better than Tennessee is. So my power ratings have Georgia winning, but Tennessee covering the spread. I'm going to pick Tennessee straight up because that Ole Miss game, I think, shows major concerns. A team can be different from Saturday to Saturday, and that's why I think Georgia scores 17 and holds Tennessee to 23. I do think that Ole Miss is better than Tennessee, but I don't think that Ole Miss is double digits better than Tennessee, even if you were to factor in home field advantage. I do think that Georgia will bring a better game against Tennessee than they did against Ole Miss, and I do think that Ole Miss, with hindsight, is better equipped to beat a team like Georgia or to win the national championship than Tennessee is. But regardless, I do think Tennessee wins here in a close one. Wouldn't shock me if Georgia won, but I am going with the Volunteers here by a score of 23-17. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Carlo OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Go Volunteers and go Dogs.